Good afternoon. Russia is entering the war against Israel, and this is the main shock of the day. Moscow is already preparing to send troops to help Syria. Columns are at the starting line, airfields are humming, and officials are only waving off half words and pauses, warming up the nervous silence before the storm. There are almost no details, but we managed to find out a few things. Is this a daring maneuver or the beginning of a long, dangerous game? Before we begin, friends, subscribe to the channel. We have the latest and most important world news, exclusive details of conflicts and the most accurate forecasts. Syria, which has experienced perhaps one of the most dramatic turns in its modern history over the past year, is once again turning its gaze to Moscow. After the Bashar al-Assad regime collapsed on December 8, 2024, it seemed that the map of influence in the region would be completely redrawn. The southern provinces, which were recently patrolled by the Russian military police, ended up under the control of the Israel Defense Forces. A so-called buffer zone was declared there, which, according to Tel Aviv, was intended to protect the northern border of the Jewish state and the local Drusian community. But, as often happens in Middle Eastern politics, official reasons and real motives are not always the same thing. An anonymous source close to the transitional government of Syria said that the current authorities, led by President Ahmed Ashara, are seriously considering the option of returning Russian patrols to the south of the country. The idea, at first glance, is simple. The presence of the Russian military police should become a deterrent for Israel, which, taking advantage of the power vacuum after the fall of Assad, not only strengthened its position in the southern regions, but also continues military operations there. However, there is a much more subtle political calculation behind this idea. Damascus wants Moscow not only to return as a military player, but also to take responsibility for the stability of the region, and to act as a kind of mediator in the difficult negotiations between the transitional government and the Israelis. Interestingly, the first steps towards restoring such cooperation are already visible. Just a few days after the visit of the Syrian foreign minister, siege of Ashebani to Moscow, on July 31st, on August 1st, Russian military police patrols were spotted in the northeast of the country, in the vicinity of the city of Al-Qamishli, for the first time since December 2024. As reported by the Saudi newspaper, Asharq al-Azad, a column of Russian vehicles, accompanied by 2 helicopters, proceeded east of the city. This region, located on the border with Turkey, is formally controlled by the Kurdish Alliance of Democratic Forces of Syria, SDF. And here another intrigue arises. The patrol was carried out without the participation of SDF representatives. This is important because the Kurds are still arguing with the new government about the status of their autonomous territory. An anonymous source in Damascus emphasizes that Russia's increased activity in the Al-Qamishli area is a direct result of the establishment of contacts between Moscow and the transitional government. According to him, the current government in Syria is interested in expanding this interaction and transferring it to the southern provinces. And there is reason for this. Fierce ethno-confessional clashes continue in the south. Israel remains the main external force, and local residents are increasingly expressing dissatisfaction with a protracted instability. Meanwhile, Russia has retained key military facilities in the country. The Naval Logistics Center in the province of Tartus, the Khmeimim Air Base in Lataki and the military airfield in El-Qamishli. These bases are not just symbols of military presence, but also real strategic levers that Moscow, apparently, is not going to give up. Moreover, according to Reuters, Israel directly said in negotiations with the United States back in March of this year that it wanted to keep Russian bases in Latakia and Tartus. The reason is simple and pragmatic. If Russia leaves, they could be occupied by Turkey, and for Israel, Ankara is one of the most dangerous regional competitors. But how ready is Israel for the return of Russian patrols to the south? According to the source, in Israeli structures this question will depend on many factors. Among them are the content of future agreements between Russia and Israel, as well as Moscow's position on the new Syrian government. Before the fall of the siege regime, the presence of Russian troops in the south suited Tel Aviv. Then their task was to prevent the deployment of pro-Iranian groups near the Israeli borders. But even with all the interest, this task remained extremely difficult. After all, during the siege, many pro-Iranian formations formally became part of the Syrian army and special services, where the Syrian troops end and the forces affiliated with Iran begin. The question was and remains open. The situation, meanwhile, remains extremely tense. Israel still insists on the demilitarization of the territory from its borders to the southern outskirts of Damascus and is clearly not thrilled with the appearance of armed units in this zone of the new Syrian government. At the same time, Damascus is convinced that Russian patrols could play the role of not only a military stabilizer, but also a political guarantor, which is capable of calming Israeli fears and at the same time strengthening the position of the transitional government. This entire diplomatic and military mosaic comes together to form a picture where Russia once again finds itself at the center of Middle Eastern intrigue. On the same board are Israel, Turkey, the Kurds, transitional Syria, and Iran. Any wrong move could change the balance of power in the region, and any successful one could secure Moscow's status as a key arbiter. And, judging by the current dynamics, events will develop quickly. Syria has already made the first step, making it clear that it awaits the Russian military back in the south. Russia is acting cautiously for now, limiting itself to patrols in the northeastern part of the country and checking the reaction of all interested parties. Israel is holding a pause, but behind the scenes, a game of preemption is already underway, which means that the most interesting things are yet to come. And it is possible that in the coming months we will witness a new round of the big Middle East deal, where Russian patrols will become not just a military measure, but an element of a large political combination capable of determining the future of Syria for years to come. If Russia really decides to return to the southern provinces of Syria, the consequences of this step will be felt not only in Syria itself, but also far beyond its borders. Firstly, it will be a signal that Moscow intends not only to hold on to existing military facilities, but to expand its presence in the region, strengthening its positions on the line of direct contact with the interests of Israel. For Damascus, this will be an important symbol of the restoration of statehood and a demonstration that the transitional government is capable of enlisting the support of a serious ally. For Russia, an opportunity to reassert itself as a key player capable of influencing the balance of power in one of the most explosive regions of the world. Israel will most likely react to the return of Russian patrols with cautious distrust. Formally, Tel Aviv could welcome the step if it helps prevent pro-Iranian forces from penetrating deep into southern Syria. However, in practice, everything will depend on what specific agreements Russia concludes with Damascus and what guarantees it gives to Israel. Tel Aviv will not want to find itself in a situation where the Russian presence becomes a cover for strengthening Iranian influence, even if it is formally denied. Here, the eternal dilemma comes into play: to cooperate with Moscow to contain Iran or to try to act independently, risking a face-to-face confrontation with the Russian military presence. There is another nuance. If Russian patrols appear in the south, Israel will effectively lose the ability to operate there. Without looking back, today, the Israel Defense Forces can conduct operations on Syrian territory, relying on the created buffer zone and the absence of serious external players. With the appearance of Russian columns, any airstrike or ground operation will require much more complex diplomatic agreements or will be fraught with direct incidents with Moscow, which Israel clearly wants to avoid. On the other hand, Israel understands that Russia's presence can be beneficial as a stabilizing factor. Tel Aviv remembers very well how, before Assad's fall, it was Russian patrols that helped keep southern Syria in a state of relative equilibrium, preventing either Iran or Syrian armed groups from completely seizing the initiative. In this logic, the return of Russian forces could be perceived as a chance to freeze the situation, maintaining the current status quo, albeit with certain restrictions for the Israeli army. The Turkish factor should not be forgotten either. In recent years, Israel has viewed Ankara as a serious threat to its regional interests, and in this context, the Russian presence in Syria is also beneficial as a counterweight to Turkish activity. If Moscow strengthens its position in the south, it will be able to control some of the routes and zones that Turkey could use to expand its influence. For Israel, this is an argument in favor of not hindering the return of Russian patrols, despite all concerns. However, there are also risky moves in this game of chess. Israel understands perfectly well that Moscow will conduct a dialogue not only with it, but also with other players, Iran, Turkey, perhaps even with whose forces Tel Aviv categorically does not accept. This means that any strengthening of Russia in the region will simultaneously mean strengthening its negotiating capabilities, which may work against Israel's interests in the long term. And yet, the likelihood that the parties will find a common language is quite high. Israel and Russia have repeatedly demonstrated their ability to agree on tactical issues, especially when it came to preventing direct clashes. If Moscow offers a clear mechanism for coordinating actions and guarantees that southern Syria will remain free of pro-Iranian formations, Israel may not only come to terms with its return, but also use this factor to its advantage. In this case, the return of Russian patrols will not be a step towards confrontation, but an element of a new, fragile, but working system of regional balance. If you liked the episode, like and subscribe. Remember, we always inform earlier and more clearly than anyone else. Until the next videos.